Have you ever noticed something strange? Sometimes the things that hurt us the most are the things we've already lost. The relationship ended months ago. The opportunity disappeared years ago. The argument finished long ago. And yet somehow, your mind keeps returning to it. You replay the conversation. You imagine different endings. You wonder what would have happened if you had said something else. If you had stayed. If you had left sooner. If you had made one different decision. Eventually, the event itself no longer hurts as much. Instead, what hurts is your inability to let it go. Why? Many people assume letting go is simply a matter of willpower. Just stop thinking about it. Move on. Focus on something else. But psychology suggests something much more interesting. The human mind wasn't designed to forget unfinished experiences easily. In fact, it often does exactly the opposite. Psychologists have long observed something called the Zeigarnik Effect. People tend to remember unfinished tasks much better than completed ones. Imagine watching a movie that suddenly ends halfway through. No explanation, no ending, no resolution. Your brain immediately starts asking questions. What happened? How does it end? Why did it stop? The lack of closure becomes mentally uncomfortable. Now imagine the same thing happening in your own life. A relationship ends without explanation. Someone suddenly disappears. A friendship slowly fades without a clear reason. A job application never receives a response. You never discover why. From your brain's perspective, these aren't simply memories. They're unfinished stories. And unfinished stories keep demanding attention. Not because your brain enjoys suffering. Because unfinished information feels incomplete. The mind naturally tries to complete patterns. That's one reason we replay painful memories again and again. Not because we enjoy them. Because the brain keeps searching for the missing piece. Maybe if I understand what happened, maybe if I analyze it one more time, maybe then I can finally move on. But something unexpected often happens. The more we search for perfect closure, the farther away it seems. Because reality rarely provides perfect explanations. People leave for complicated reasons. Life changes unexpectedly. Some questions never receive satisfying answers. And yet the brain keeps insisting that certainty must exist somewhere. This creates an exhausting loop. You search for answers. You don't find enough. Your uncertainty increases, so you search again. Days become weeks. Weeks become months. Sometimes years. At that point, you're no longer trapped by the original event. You're trapped by the search itself. The Stoics noticed something remarkably similar nearly 2,000 years ago. Epictetus observed that suffering often comes not from events themselves, but from our refusal to accept that some events have already happened. Reality has already moved forward. Our minds haven't. Imagine holding a rope attached to a boat drifting farther and farther away. The harder you pull, the more exhausted you become. But the boat doesn't return. Not because you're weak. Because reality isn't moving backward. This is what attachment often feels like psychologically. We continue negotiating with something that no longer exists. We mentally bargain with the past. Maybe if I understand enough. Maybe if I regret enough. Maybe if I think hard enough, reality will change. Of course, it never does. But our brains evolve to keep trying. From an evolutionary perspective, remembering painful mistakes was useful. If touching fire caused injury, remembering that pain increased survival. If trusting the wrong person created danger, remembering that experience protected the future. The problem is that modern emotional pain isn't always solved the same way physical danger is. Sometimes there is nothing left to fix, nothing left to recover, nothing left to understand, only something left to accept. And acceptance is one of the hardest psychological skills a human being can develop. Not because it requires intelligence, because it asks us to stop negotiating with reality. That feels deeply unnatural. Our minds constantly whisper, there must be another answer. There must be another explanation. There must be another chance. Sometimes there isn't. And strangely enough, the moment we stop demanding certainty from the past is often the moment our minds finally begin to experience peace. If letting go would reduce our suffering, why do we resist it so fiercely? The answer isn't because we're irrational. It's because letting go often feels like losing something twice. Imagine spending years building a relationship. You create memories, plans, dreams about the future. Eventually, the relationship ends. Objectively, you've already experienced the loss. But psychologically, another loss remains. If you let go, it can feel as though those years no longer matter, as though everything becomes meaningless. This is one reason people continue holding on to painful experiences. Not because the experience still serves them, because releasing it feels like erasing part of themselves. Psychologists sometimes describe something similar through the sunk cost effect. The more time, effort, emotion, or money we invest into something, the harder it becomes to walk away. Imagine spending 3 hours waiting in line for a concert. Halfway through, someone tells you the performance has been canceled. Objectively, leaving immediately saves you more wasted time. But emotionally, many people hesitate. I've already waited this long. I can't leave now. Notice the logic. Past investment begins controlling present decisions. The same thing happens emotionally. I spent 10 years in this relationship. I've worked toward this dream my entire life. I sacrificed too much to give up now. The past quietly starts making decisions for the present. But the past has no ability to return what it already took. Every additional day spent holding on to something broken becomes a new investment. Not recovery, more investment. This creates another psychological trap. The longer we hold on, the more difficult letting go appears. Because now we're protecting not only the original investment, we're protecting all the years spent refusing to release it. The Stoics saw this differently. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that every moment belongs to the present. Not yesterday, not tomorrow, only now. From his perspective, asking the past to justify itself was impossible. The past had already completed its work. Whether it brought joy or suffering, its role had ended. Only the present remained available for action. This sounds simple, but psychologically, it's incredibly difficult. Because our identity often becomes attached to our history. Think about how often people introduce themselves through old stories. I used to. I should have. I almost became. I lost. I was betrayed. Gradually, painful experiences stop being events. They become identities. Instead of saying, I experienced rejection, we begin saying, I'm someone who gets rejected. Instead of, I failed once, we begin believing, I'm a failure. This transformation is subtle, but it changes everything. Because once pain becomes part of identity, letting go no longer feels like releasing suffering. It feels like losing yourself. That's why healing often feels frightening. Imagine carrying a heavy backpack for 20 years. At first, it's obviously painful. But eventually, your body adapts, your posture changes, your muscles compensate. The backpack becomes familiar. Then one day, someone removes it. Surprisingly, you don't immediately feel comfortable. You feel strangely unbalanced. Lighter, but unfamiliar. Emotional pain works the same way. Sometimes we become so accustomed to anxiety, to regret, to resentment, that peace itself begins feeling unfamiliar. The brain naturally prefers familiarity over uncertainty, even when familiarity hurts. That's why people sometimes return to unhealthy relationships, stay in jobs they hate, replay memories that make them miserable. Not because suffering feels good, because it's predictable. Predictability often feels safer than change. This is where letting go requires something deeper than motivation. It requires rebuilding identity. Instead of asking, who am I without this pain? The better question becomes, who am I becoming now? Notice the difference. One question looks backward. The other looks forward. Psychologically, those are completely different directions. The first keeps searching for what disappeared. The second begins creating something that never existed before. And perhaps that's what letting go really is. Not forgetting. Not pretending nothing happened. Not forcing yourself to stop caring. But quietly allowing the past to stop introducing itself every time someone asks who you are. If letting go doesn't mean forgetting, what does it actually mean? Perhaps it means something much quieter. It means allowing reality to become more important than imagination. Think about how much suffering comes not from what happened, but from what we keep imagining should have happened instead. I should have said something different. They should have understood me. Life should have gone according to my plan. Notice one small word that appears over and over. Should. The Stoics believed this single habit of thinking creates enormous suffering. Because every time we say reality should have been different, we're arguing with something that has already happened. Marcus Aurelius wrote that reality unfolds according to causes far larger than our personal preferences. Whether we approve of those causes or not, the event has already entered history. Our resistance cannot erase it. Imagine standing in the middle of a river. The current continues flowing downstream. You become angry. You demand that the water reverse direction. You shout. You resist. Hours pass. The river continues exactly as before. Eventually, the exhaustion isn't caused by the river. It's caused by fighting the river. Psychologically, many people spend years doing exactly this. Not with rivers, with reality. They fight conversations that already ended, relationships that already ended, opportunities that already disappeared, versions of themselves that no longer exist. The strange part is that acceptance doesn't require approval. You can accept that something happened without believing it was fair. You can accept a loss without believing you deserved it. You can accept disappointment without pretending it didn't hurt. Acceptance isn't agreement. It's recognition. Recognition that reality doesn't need our permission to be real. Modern psychology reaches a remarkably similar conclusion. Research on psychological flexibility suggests that emotional health depends less on controlling difficult thoughts and more on changing our relationship with them. Instead of asking, "How do I stop thinking about this?" the healthier question becomes, "Can I continue living even while this thought exists?" Notice how different those questions are. The first tries to eliminate discomfort. The second makes room for it. Ironically, when we stop fighting uncomfortable emotions, they often lose much of their power. Imagine trying to push a beach ball underwater. The harder you push, the more forcefully it wants to return. Eventually, your arms become exhausted. Not because the ball is powerful, because constant resistance requires constant effort. Emotions often behave the same way. The more desperately we try to suppress grief, the longer grief stays alive. The more aggressively we fight regret, the more attention regret receives. What we resist often remains at the center of awareness, but what we allow gradually loses its urgency. This doesn't happen overnight. Healing rarely arrives as one dramatic breakthrough. More often, it looks almost invisible. One morning you realize you didn't think about that person until lunchtime. A week later, you hear their name and your heart doesn't race the way it once did. Months later, you remember the experience without feeling pulled back into it. The memory remains, but the struggle disappears. Perhaps that's the deepest misunderstanding about letting go. People imagine that healing means the memory disappears. In reality, healing often means the memory no longer controls your present. The story still exists. It simply stops being the chapter you're living inside. This is why the Stoics constantly return to the present moment. Not because the past didn't matter, but because only the present contains the possibility of action. The past can teach you. The future can inspire you. But neither one can be lived. Only this moment asks something of you. Only this conversation. Only this decision. Only this breath. Perhaps that is what freedom has always meant. Not escaping your past. Not erasing painful memories. Not becoming someone who never feels sadness. But becoming someone who no longer asks yesterday for permission to live today. Eventually, every human being loses something. A relationship. A dream. A version of themselves. A chapter that once felt permanent. The question is never whether loss will arrive. It always does. The real question is what happens afterward. Will you spend years negotiating with a reality that has already moved on? Or will you slowly loosen your grip until your hands become free enough to hold what life is offering now? Because perhaps letting go was never about losing something. Perhaps it has always been about returning your attention to the only place where peace has ever been possible. The present. And maybe that's where your life has been quietly waiting for you all along.